danger that was coming from finding her. There wasn't a day that passed that I didn't worry I was being selfish, that I was letting my love for her, for having her in my life, blind me to the danger I might be putting her in, especially if my gut feeling was... I was suddenly racked by a spasm of coughing as I took the receipt. It was getting worse again. The pain and the weakness, the aching and coughing would come and go every few weeks. And at first, I tried to chalk it up to colds or allergies from being in a new place. And when Rachel started looking more concerned, I tried to get better at hiding how bad I felt when it was at its worst. But the worst was worse now. And for the last few months, I'd admitted to myself what I'd always known. This wasn't some passing sickness, it was the thing Solomon had put inside me, a small part of the tree that had saved me and helped me find Rachel again. And just like it had her, it was killing me. Rachel had wanted me to get it out for months, though I couldn't say for sure if it was because she didn't like the idea of something we didn't understand being inside of me, or because I wasn't doing a good enough job of fooling her when it hit me the hardest. At first, I tried to just postpone making a decision about it, but a few weeks ago, she brought it up again, and I could tell that she wasn't going to let it go this time. We had our first real fight, and in the end, I had to be honest with her and myself. As much as I wanted to get rid of the thing inside me, I didn't think I could. I had a feeling that trying to take it out would kill me, and even if it didn't, it would rob us of any help we might have if trouble ever came, because I could still feel it in there, and through it, I could see and feel more of everything. It wasn't like what the other Rachel had. I wasn't gifted like her, and I didn't get visions, but I was sensitive to certain things. And even if I didn't understand it and couldn't control it, it made it harder to deny the growing feeling that something bad was coming. Wiping my mouth, I waved off the kid's concerned look. "I'll be okay. I just have a bad case of..." I frowned. What was the word? Blushing, I offered him a smile. "Sorry, guess I'm still..." I couldn't think of what came next. Or I could, but I couldn't get it out somehow. Having trouble with words sometimes wasn't anything new for me, but it was getting worse. It could be caused by the clipping inside of me, but I didn't think so. There was something else wrong, and... I dropped the bags I was carrying, looking around in the entryway of the grocery store for who had whispered the words to me. No one was there, though. I wasn't really surprised, because I recognized the voice that spoke to me. The musical words that weren't words shot through with images and emotions and ideas I didn't fully understand. But I understood enough. Coughing again, I dug into my pocket for my phone. I needed to call Rachel and warn her, tell her to run before it was too late. My fear woke up before I did. Its arms wrapped around me, pulling me close as it whispered that nothing would be all right. It made the last moments of sleep troubled, and rather than stay in the constricting drowse that lay between dream and nightmare and wakeful worry, I forced myself awake. Everything was fine, or if not fine, it was okay. We were safe for the moment, and...
Thomas was gone. Blinking, I patted the empty bed beside me again as I looked up and around the room. No sign of him, and I couldn't hear any sounds of movement or life from the kitchen or living room either. It wasn't a large place, and while Thomas was always acutely aware about noise if I was asleep, it was rare that you didn't quickly know when someone was awake in the house. I didn't get a sense of him now, though. I felt cold and alone. And being awake wasn't the cure-all for my fears that I'd been hoping for. That momentary panic wasn't a new thing, of course. Ever since Thomas had come from the tunnel and helped me escape the basement, I'd had times where a sense of unreality would wash over me, a needle in my heart whispering that this couldn't be real, that it was too good to be true, that it wouldn't last. Over the last year, I'd learned to ignore those whispers most of the time. It was real, and being with Thomas was wonderful, but it also felt like the truest thing I'd ever known. As for it lasting, there was always a clock running in my head, a clock that counted every day, every hour, sometimes every minute. It ticked with my heartbeat and spoke to me with that same nasty needle voice, reminding me that every moment I had out with him, I'd have to pay back fivefold to the tree. At first, I tried to ignore it. I was so happy to be out, and to get to know him, it wasn't hard to do. But as I got used to being free and started realizing how I felt about him, a panic began to set in, an uncertainty of what to do and when, I tried to ignore and how much I should tell him before it was too late. Thomas knew the basics, how I'd moved into the house with Phil/Justin, discovered the room and the journal, and how I traveled those same tunnels that he'd come through to find me after months of being walled into that prison by Justin. Initially, I wasn't going to mention my ongoing connection to the tree, but then Thomas had told me his own story. By the end, he had been red-eyed when he looked at me, his voice just above a whisper that still filled the motel room we'd rented 2 towns away from the house I'd shared with Justin. He was crying for her, a woman that he'd never met but he clearly loved, a woman that, well, he believed was another version of me. Before the house and the tree and the tunnels, I would have thought that was insane. But sitting in that room with him, I barely batted an eye at the thought of alternate realities and magic tree clippings. I learned enough to not be surprised by such things, but at the moment he was telling me all of this, it also all seemed very unimportant. All that mattered was him, sitting on the edge of that bed, struggling not to cry as he talked about finding out that she was dead. I was ashamed of the irrational twinge of jealousy I felt in that moment. I barely knew him at all, and I certainly had no right to feel possessive. But the shame and jealousy fell away as I saw his massive shoulders begin to shudder as the tears finally came. I moved over to the bed he was on and put my arm around him, rubbing his back as he described waking up and escaping the place where they'd implanted something inside him, following that other Rachel's paintings and the things singing from within to another version of the ghost tree in that other world, following the path until it brought him to me. He'd been through so much, and as terrible as my last few months had been, none of it seemed to matter much anymore. Holding him close as he trailed off with an embarrassed laugh, I found myself angry at what had been done to him, and sad that I couldn't do more to make him feel better. I wanted him to be safe and feel happy, and I wanted to be the one that made him that way. And when I touched his face and he looked up at me, I could see that the thing between us wasn't just adrenaline or past traumas, not just pining after ghosts or doppelgangers. It was real, and I knew the light I saw in his eyes was reflected in my own. So I kissed him. It wasn't until 2 days later, when we were checking out and moving on, that I told him about my being bound to the tree, that I needed to figure out a way to break the connection for good, or I'd have to go back into those tunnels from time to time, whether I wanted to or not. He'd asked questions, but I tried to stay vague, acting as though it would be a long time before it would really be an issue. At the time, it hadn't felt like a lie, but a year had already passed in what felt like a blink, and I only had Justin's honesty and the tree's consistency to rely on. That I had another year before it pulled me back inside, listening again for any sign of Thomas in the house. I had the terrible thought that maybe I was already back in the tree, that it had somehow pulled me and the house into its roots so I'd be more comfortable. That wasn't possible, was it? I couldn't say for sure, but I saw a yellow post-it note stuck to my nightstand, Thomas's messy scrawl making me smile even before I read the words. If you wake up, went to the grocery, stone, store. Be back soon. My smile faltered a little as I read. He'd written stair and then stone before marking them out.